the story about his battle with depression a little bit later on. But off the top, last week, the Canadian Alliance on Mental Health and Mental Illness, also known as CAMI, announced 5 Canadians selected for the 13th annual Faces of Mental Illness campaign, received dozens of nominations from across the country, people living in recovery from mental illness, and we're so happy and proud to have one of those nominees join us. His name is Peter Neily. He's a member of the RCMP, and he's got quite a story to tell. Peter, first of all, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, let's start off with your story. As we talked about first responders, we all know that you go through some terrible things and some horrific things, and your story really obviously jumped out and affected a lot of people, not the least of which is you. Kind of go back to your career and what that really terrible moment was that kind of started the whole ball rolling.
Sure. Well, as you said there, it's sometimes in these types of things, your entire career, it's important to talk about, that as well, because it is sometimes a buildup of a few different things that, do affect you deeply in the long run. But for me specifically, it was, one incident that does, I have had some challenges because of, and does still continue to affect me to this day. And that was in March of 2011. So in 2004, when I graduated from the RCMP's training academy in Depot there, I was transferred out to Surrey, BC. And, for the next few years, I worked in a few different jobs there. I was a uniform patrol officer, which is probably the best part of it all. And I was a traffic officer, as well as I did a few other things in plain clothes, being, auto theft and property crime. And I also worked in media relations for a bit. So shortly before I actually transferred out of Surrey to go to Ontario, I went back to the road. So I went back to being a patrol officer. And on one of my night shifts there in March of 2011, March the 2nd specifically, there was an incident where another police vehicle in the city pulled over a vehicle for a violation there. And during that stop, they observed a firearm in the vehicle. And the vehicle subsequently fled the scene there when, they attempted to apprehend the driver. And later on, not too long after, that vehicle ended up crashing into 2 civilian cars right in front of me at an intersection. And at that time, myself and the driver of that vehicle engaged in a confrontation. I guess, you could call it a lethal force confrontation, in which involved me discharging my firearm, and tragically the suspect in that matter ended up dying of his injuries. So I ended up going through a difficult time after that because of that incident at the time. Now,
let's talk about what happened afterwards. I mean, one of the things that you talked about, I know that there was an inquest into what happened, and the line you used is, I've had a feeling like I've never had before, or I've had it since I believed that I was dead. I can't imagine what's going through your mind at the time when that struggle ensues.
No, and you know what? It is difficult to imagine, and even for me to put myself back in that situation, it does bring back that unbelievably scary feeling that, you are facing a situation where, your mind and your body believe right then and there that this is it, you're dead. And I'm very, I'm very happy that it didn't turn out that way, obviously, but the effects of that feeling afterwards were tremendous. At first I was, I actually, I'm not sure what it was, but for a few months there I was fine. I just wanted to get back to work, and then I went back to work. I went back to being a patrol officer, and I enjoyed my job. I enjoyed being with my colleagues, and everything was fine. And then I had a transfer that was set into motion actually shortly before this shooting incident, and I ended up, transferring. And I think what happened then was I kind of came out of my support network and my comfort zone there, and ended up in a new place. And I think after that, things really really spiraled downhill.
I wanted to ask, after the incident, because of course we always know that police talk about debriefing and what have you, maybe kind of a loaded question for you here, but did you get the support initially after that incident happened, or you said you went back to work for a couple of months afterwards, but do you think maybe the support wasn't there initially after that incident?
You know what, I had a tremendous amount of support, and I was very fortunate. I think right from the moment that incident happened, I was kind of swept up into the arms of a lot of people that cared, and I think that was the really important part. Was I had a lot of good, close friends out there. My colleagues, I thought of them as family. So they were there for me, and they did everything they could to help me. I had a support network out there, a professional that I was speaking with after this, and it was all very helpful. And the RCMP was there to support me, and from the perspective of the night of, and shortly after, and then that continued afterwards. But sometimes these things, I'm not an expert in this field, but I really don't know if there's anything that can predict what's going to happen. That suddenly things turn the other way in your mind, and suddenly it becomes a negative experience. But it did end up happening about 7 months later.
Talk about some of the symptoms that you went through, some of the physical things. We all talk about PTSD, and of course, unless people have had it, they have no idea what somebody goes through. What were some of the physical and some of the psychological things you went through when you realized that this is what you were battling?
Yeah, well, I mean, physically, a lot of that follows with some of the psychological issues, and I think what I mean by that is I would have flashbacks, and I would have nightmares and whatnot, and so as a result, then I was constantly on edge and tense. Like I'd go with a lot of muscle pain in my upper neck and my back and whatnot there, just from constantly being tensed up. And I had some issues with my jaw. I was constantly clenching my teeth, expecting the worst of the worst around every corner. And you'd wake up in the night being in a really significant sweat there, and sometimes literally screaming out in the night. My wife has had to endure that a few times, and it's an awful experience, and sometimes when I speak about this incident and the aftermath of it, I find myself literally forgetting to breathe, and that's one thing I've had to work on with treatment over time. Is I'll suddenly be basically out of breath, and my chest will be tight and whatnot, and it becomes very difficult. So a lot of times they're just these feelings that you just don't know when they're coming, and you can't. There's really nothing you can do to prepare yourself. So you need to find a way to cope with them when they do come, and that's what the key has been. Now,
the RCMP on their website, on their YouTube channel, they have a video called Peter's Story. Why did you decide to go public with your story?
Well, that movement came about for me a couple of years after everything had gotten to its worst, and the reason for that was that I found when I was in the worst of this that I just couldn't find anybody saying anything really positive about their experience with PTSD or occupational stress injuries or anything that negative happened to them on the job. There was a lot of negativity around the subject that I felt was perpetuating a lot of the stigmas around it. So, if you're hearing things like, I'm going to get fired because of this, or, everybody's going to laugh at me because of this, if you're hearing those things all the time, you might literally start to believe them. So I thought, this isn't how I feel. This isn't what my experience has been, although I did, before I went into treatment, feel that was going to happen. But we needed to start a conversation around the fact that, hey, we need to start being there for each other. We need to start knowing that these things can kind of happen to anybody. And it's time to kind of step up and set an example about that. So that was it. And part of it, too, is there have been police officers who have been, committing suicide over these issues. And I think, because of all the support that I've received, since I had some of these challenges and since I went forward with them, I felt like I needed to give back and start to do something for my fellow colleagues.
We all talk about breaking the stigma. Have we progressed a lot since you started with the RCMP? You talk about when you first graduated, but are things better now than they were when you first started as far as breaking stigma, sharing the feelings, and kind of not being afraid to kind of open up and talk to people about?
Absolutely. And you know what? I think we've made tremendous progress, even in the last couple of years. When I first joined in 2004, I mean, this is not all that long ago, but I felt like I needed to be a robot. Everybody would expect perfection from me. I was a competitive athlete, so I came in with a lot of that mentality of, you need to be the best of the best and show everybody that. And I think now I've come full circle and realized that, we're human. We're like everybody else, and we have things in our own lives that affect us, and we have things that are going to happen at work because of the nature of our occupations that are going to affect us, But I've received a tremendous amount of support from, people within the RCMP that when this video came out, people coming forward and telling me their stories and some of their experiences, and also saying like, hey, this is what we needed to see, and then it's continued since then. Initially, this video came out and was only used within the RCMP, and then a few months later it went public. It went on YouTube, and then some other police forces, I've received feedback there, and also from the public in general saying, hey, this is a side of the police that, we didn't necessarily see before, and now we're seeing it, and we support this type of movement,
How are you now? Does the battle continue?
Well, I tell you what, it's I wouldn't be being truthful with you if I didn't say I didn't have my difficulties still. But having said that, I can't even begin to put myself back in the place I was in a couple of years ago when I was in the worst of this. It was awful. I was ruining my life. I was ruining my family's lives. With a lot of the substance abuse, alcoholism. I was putting a lot of these memories away with. And before I went into treatment too, some of the outbursts and the tension that I caused too were terrible, and I can say now that I'm in a place where I'm back to really enjoying my life. I'm enjoying my job. I'm back to being an operational police officer, something that I love doing. And I've got a tremendous family life now. So, these things, it's one step at a time, and each day is a new day. And I think things are getting better every day, So I'm very fortunate.
I know I'm going to ask you this question, and I think I know the answer because I know enough police officers to know it's just part of the job. It's just what I do, and I don't need any thanks. But how does it feel for you knowing that you have been selected as one of the faces of mental illness campaign by our friends at CAMI?
Well, it's a real honor. It's tremendous because it shows that there are, good people out there, organizations that are working to continue to, bring down some of the stigma and some of the issues around these things here to make it easier for people in general, police officers as well as the population in general to come forward and seek treatment for these things. We deal with a lot of mental health related calls as police officers. So if there's any way we can start to show people that, hey, we're just like everybody else too. It's great. I look at some of the other folks that have been selected there and their backgrounds, and it's tremendous. I'm really honored to be surrounded by my fellow faces there. It's great. It really is.
A police officer in the RCMP, Peter Neily, one of the 5 Canadians selected for the 13th annual Faces of Mental Illness campaign. Thanks for taking the time. Congratulations on your bravery and stepping forward. I wish you nothing but success and good health going forward, and thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Up next, she's documenting